Magandang umaga, Pilipinas. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining around the world. Thank you for joining us in today's webinar, where we will try to solve vulnerability of smallholders to climate change impacts. We are streaming to you live through the CIRCA online learning and virtual engagements platform, or SOLVE, via Zoom and Facebook Live. My name is Kim Bantayan, and I am a program specialist of CIRCA's Training for Development Unit of the Education and Collective Learning Department. I will be your moderator for this morning's webinar. The short video shown earlier has given you a glimpse about CIRCA and what we do. But if I may add, CIRCA is hosted by the Philippine government on the campus of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. So we are coming to you live from Los Baños, Laguna, the special science and nature city of the Philippines. This CIRCA online learning and virtual engagement webinar, or SOLVE for short, is CIRCA's immediate response to the emerging impacts of COVID-19 global pandemic on food security by maximizing the use of information and communication technology platforms to inform, educate, and share evidence-based solutions and tested technologies, as well as best practices on the ground. If you are new to this webinar, this is actually the 17th webinar since it was launched last April 28. Apart from the COVID-19 global pandemic, climate change remains to be one of humanity's most pressing challenges. Studies have shown that climate change poses a significant threat to smallholder farmers, which undermine their household food and income security, because these smallholder farmers depend directly on agriculture for their livelihoods and have limited resources and capacity to cope with the impacts of climate change. They also lack access to technical or financial support that could help them invest in more climate resilient agriculture. CIRCA's 11th five-year plan, which was launched last July 2020, identified enhanced agricultural and rural development towards climate resilience as one of the priority areas that would accelerate transformation through agricultural innovation, or ATTAIN. In this webinar, we will be joined by experts who will present new and innovative technologies, tools, approaches that have been developed mainly to support decision-making for climate change adaptation and mitigation, as well as enabling policies that would increase the capacity of smallholder farmers to build resilience on the ground. But before we proceed to our online conversation this morning, please allow me to quickly go over some very interesting statistics gathered from the SOLVE webinar, which we had last September 9. Okay, so the infograph shows that 64% of our online viewers were female and the rest were male. This has been the consistent trend over the past 16 SOLVE webinars that we've had, where women consistently dominated our online attendees. The infograph also indicates that more than 100 individuals tuned in via Zoom, while more than 700 viewed the webinar through CIRCA's Facebook page. And lastly, we are happy to note that we've had online attendees not only from the Philippines, but also from Cambodia, Nepal, Thailand, Vietnam, and the USA. This infograph clearly shows the number of individuals and countries that CIRCA's webinar has reached so far. We are trying our best to be able to reach as many individuals, farmers, and farming communities as possible through this online platform and really make a difference in the lives of our stakeholders, especially in this COVID-19 era. Now, going back to the webinar, let me now quickly go over the program flow, which is currently shown on your screen. After my introduction and a few housekeeping rules, Ms. Hanna Reuter, Principal Advisor at GIZ, a German development agency with its headquarters in Bonn, Germany, will discuss some Asean policy framework and outputs related to climate change in agriculture and forestry, and how does this climate smart land use project supports ASEAN bodies and ASEAN member states. Dr. Bui Le Vinh, a lecturer and researcher at the Vietnam National University of Agriculture and research consultant of the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, or CIAT, Vietnam, will share with us the process of testing climate smart villages in Vietnam and mainstreaming the CSV approach into the implementation of the National Target Program on New Rural Development in Vietnam's 2021 to 2030 strategy. Dr. Delia Catacutan, Regional Coordinator for Southeast Asia of the World Agroforestry, or ICRAF, Southeast Asia Regional Program, follows with her discussion on the application of agroforestry as a tool for increasing landscape resilience and adaptation to climate change and the impacts on smallholder farmers. And for our last speaker this morning, we have Dr. Romeo Labios, who is CIRCA's Technical Advisor for Partnerships. Dr. Labios will present to us a menu of agricultural technologies and approaches that can enhance resilience of smallholders in different agroecological systems. I know you are all excited to listen to our speakers, but first, let me encourage you to send us your questions. So how do you do this? For those of you who are tuned in via CIRCA's Facebook page, you may type your questions in the comment section. Kindly indicate your location now and or country of origin. If you are tuned in via Zoom, please post your questions or comments in the Q&A box, which you should find in the menu bar on your screen. Please also indicate your location and or country of origin. Our SOLVE team will collate, curate, and compile those questions for me, and I will verbally convey them, and hopefully we will be able to cover as many questions as we can in the time remaining. Please be clear when you are posing a question to a specific presenter or panelist, or if it is a general question that anybody can respond to, and we will do our best to get as many questions in during the Q&A session. Please note that this webinar will be recorded and will be made available on CIRCA's Facebook page and YouTube channel. Today's presentations will also be made available on CIRCA's website at www.circa.org. The slides shown during the past webinars have already been posted on our website. We will also be live tweeting this webinar, so you can join in the conversation using the hashtag CIRCASolve. If you have issues or are experiencing technical difficulties with the Zoom online platform, please email my colleagues at solve@circa.org. Moving on to the presentations, we will have a slight change in the program because Ms. Hanna is not yet in. So we will have Dr. Bui Le Vinh first for his presentation, but while waiting for his presentation to be uploaded on your screen, let me first introduce him to you. Okay, so our first speaker is the very first person who introduced to us the concept of climate smart villages back in 2015, when CIRCA organized a study mission in Vietnam under the Project on Adaptation and Mitigation Initiatives in Agriculture funded by the Philippine Department of Agriculture. So who would ever thought that our path will cross again in a webinar like this? Anyway, our speaker has been involved in agricultural research for development since 2002. Vinh holds a PhD in soils from Hohenheim University, a Master of Science in Soil Science from Ghent University, and another university in Brussels, which I have difficulty pronouncing, and bachelor's degree in land management from Vietnam National University of Agriculture. He worked on his doctoral research with the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, or CIAT, and has been collaborating with CIAT in its Climate Smart Village project in Vietnam since May 2017. So here to present to us the CSV approach and scaling pathways into Vietnam's 2021-2030 strategy, please welcome Dr. Bui Le Vinh. Over to you, Vinh.
Good morning, everyone again. My name is Bui Le Vinh. I'm a lecturer at Vietnam National University of Agriculture, VNUA. And at the same time, I'm working in collaboration with the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, CIAT, in Hanoi. So I've been working with CIAT since 2015 as a postdoctoral researcher until 2017. And afterwards, I came back to VNUA being a lecturer, but still collaborating with CIAT so far on the same long-term project. And today I'm here to share with you experience drawn from the long-term and joint project with CIAT. The topic that I'm delivering to you today its CSV approach and scaling pathways into Vietnam's NTM 2021-2030 strategy. So it's quite ambitious topic. I'll try to make it within 15 minutes. So the content of my presentation today consists of 5 parts. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of the joint project for all of those years since 2015. Second, what is a CSV? What does a CSV look like, and what consists in a CSV? The study area and objectives of the joint project, and how we have developed CSVs so far in this area. And last but not least, the scaling pathways into the Vietnam's most or largest development program in agriculture, an NTM program, in this next 10-year period. So a bit of the background of the project. So Vietnam is among the most vulnerable countries to climate impacts, together with Philippines, Myanmar in the region, and some other countries in the world too. Yeah, we've been experiencing extreme climate anomalies in recent years or recent decades. For example, extreme droughts, hot and cold spells, intensive rainfalls, sea level rise especially. And the CICRAF program was initiated in the world, if I remember correctly, back in 2011, starting in India, and then it's spread out to other parts of the world, like Latin America, Central America, Western and East Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. So the CICRAF program landed in Vietnam back in 2015 in 3 agroecological zones of Vietnam, northern, central, and southern parts of Vietnam. And there the program built concretely 3 CSVs for 3 regions. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a lecturer from VNUA, and therefore VNUA has become specifically an important partner with CICRAF and with CIAT in this project ever since I started working in the program up until now. And since I came back to VNUA back in 2017, I continue to pick up the CICRAF initiative and raise more funding to scale the work out. And a bit about the NTM program. The full name of it is National Target Program on New Rural Development. It was initiated back in the 2000s with its first 10-year period from 2010 to 2020. So it's ending the end of this year, and then it's transitioning into its second 10-year period. And in the first strategy, this 10 years, it managed to change the face and the performance of many rural areas in Vietnam. So this is a very ambitious program. It works across the country in almost 9,000 communes in the country. So the major achievements were mainly in infrastructural development for irrigation, education, medical care. However, it failed to build resilience and adaptive capacity to climate change for farmers. And so that's why the CICRAF program, I mean, this is actually an entry point for the CICRAF program to scale the work into the NTM in its next 10 years. So what is CSV? So very briefly, a CSV is just a location where we practice and train farmers to implement activities that can help them build adaptive capacity and resilience to climate change via climate smart agriculture technology practices and other activities that can foster and then sustain the model in the long run, to mobilize all resources, human resources, financial resources, natural resources, and different players into the place so that they can work together to achieve this very goal. So in such a location, first we need to, identify a specific climate risk and climate impacts, so that we can together work out solutions. And often, local governments and farmers or people who live there, they themselves have been already trying to work out different solutions to cope with climate risk, even without this CCAP's intervention. But, however, these solutions or actions, they're often fragmented, and they're not so well connected. While in reality, we need this complete picture, right? Smooth, and one component is supporting each other. Every component is supporting others. So we need to harmonize these solutions, these activities or actions, to build up a strong community and effective and efficient community. Therefore, we need such a ground to practice the CSV model, that different players can work well together. It's called Climate Smart Village, and we can start from the village level, and then we scale up to commune, district, province, and country level. So this is how the scaling needs to go. And there are we have drawn this lesson from the CICAF's work in Southeast Asia, about 5 components of a CSV. So we need, for example, we need technical measures, for example, CSA technologies and practices. We have information services of climate or weather forecast, seasonal planning. We need to utilize effectively, efficiently local knowledge, because some of the local knowledge is already resilient, so we don't have to invent something super new. And then we need to work together to come up with good action plans, and also mobilize different resources available, like human resource, financial, natural, in order to meet the implementation objectives. So the study area for this long-term project, collaborative project, it has been in Yên province, and it's still going now. So this is the map of the province. Actually, I should have put the Vietnam map here and put the west located, but it's in northern Vietnam, northwestern Vietnam, and there are 3 agroecological zones. Let's say like small ecologies, right, in the province, and then in CIAT during the period 2015 to 18, we successfully developed a CSV called CSV that Kim mentioned about here in this area in agroecology 1. And since I got back to VNUA, I raised more, I got more projects, and to scale out the CSV model to the other 2 agroecologies in nearby province. And the objectives of the joint work for such a long time is to set up CSV demonstration sites for horizontal scaling within agroecologies, and to build a scaling case at provincial level of Yên Bai. So this province is called Yên Bai, from which we can recommend scaling pathways for vertical scaling into the NTM program. So you can see here 2 keywords, horizontal and vertical scaling, which I will speak about in a few minutes. So I will go very quickly about how the CSV was set up through 3 major steps. So the first step is we did was situation analysis and risk assessment, or baseline surveys. You can basically say baseline. It's easy to understand. So we need first to we organize different workshops, meetings with farmers to identify climate risks, not only with farmers, but with private sector, policy makers, scientists. So we gather together and then work out to identify climate risk and impacts in a CSV or MAP village, and then we organize smaller meetings with champion farmers, key farmers, to analyze the situation more deeply, from which we can we assess needs of the local people of the village in order to pursue the CSV and CSA goals. We organize different policy dialogues to bring farmers, policymakers, private sector together. They share their thoughts and needs. Farmers share their thoughts and needs, and policymakers they can also see that and use resources available from back at the province to help. And then scientists go to the field to do their work with farmers, like baseline surveys, including biophysical, socio-economic surveys to prepare for the work. The second step is to select like CSA TNPs for testing. First of all, we organized or we set up a multi-sectoral platform, including scientists, farmers, extension workers, policymakers, private sector, and local organizations, as I said in the previous slide. Then together we develop a portfolio of potential CSA technologies that might work, in a location. So you can see here we have like 9 posters representing 9 different CSA TNPs. So they are not only 9, there are more, but I only put in like 9 examples here. Then we organized CSA prioritization workshop, explaining each and every TNP for the farmers, so they can give score and select TNPs that might work according to their experience. And we moved on to do cost-benefit analysis to finally have some proof, concrete proof to select final CSV TNPs for testing. And then we moved on to implementation. So implementation, first of all, we created these linkages between the TNP selected. We organized farmer interest groups to do different CSA TNPs and other activities related to the CSV work as a whole. We provided technical training for farmers, created demonstration sites for knowledge sharing, and also we encouraged farmers to diffuse the knowledge and experience within the community to other peer farmers who didn't have the chance to participate directly with our testing activities. So the scaling, we tried to make sure that scaling was already going on during the testing period. So now let's talk about scaling pathways. As I mentioned in a slide before, there are 2 different directions for scaling: horizontal scaling and vertical scaling. And you can see here from the bottom to the top, we have climate smart village, commune, district, province, and country. And horizontal scaling happens at communal and district levels, starting with a successful climate smart village setup within one commune, and then from it serves then as a lighthouse or a demonstration site for multiplication to other villages. And one successful commune then serves as the same, like a good example for scaling at a district level. So vertical scaling happens from the provincial level to the country level, because these 2 levels can make policies because they have resources. And so all evidence and proof need to be collected at provincial level and country level for making policies. That's vertical scaling. So recommend to the NTM program, we one of the things we recommend is to consider these 6 components in the CSV adopted from the research of this team in India, instead of 4 that I mentioned earlier. And from literature study, we gathered information that might work for Vietnam in 6 steps for building a CSV. I'm not going. So these acronyms, we have like explanation for these acronyms here. I'm not going to read them all. But then the major 6 steps include SANA, situation analysis and needs assessment or baseline surveys, social mobilization. So this is, we emphasize this because it has not been emphasized enough in many other studies. But in Vietnam, social mobilization is very important in many programs or activities. Design, then we move to design and planning, then creating evidence, and then scaling. But then we need to monitor and evaluate results achieved all the way within this process. So this work is going to be published soon in next week, together with this diagram. So I was saying that at the village level, like different villages sensitive to climate risk should be reported to the commune. The commune gathers information to central district, again district to province, province to the Ministry of Agriculture, to the national NTM program. And again, I mean, based on this, say, SANA information, the ministry makes priority planning, budget allocation, and objective or assignments to send out to province to district, district to commune, commune down back to village. And along this implementation process, the work should be monitored and evaluated and documented. And then lower levels, like for example CSV and commune, they need to report to higher levels up there. So I think this is quite complete cycle how the scaling needs to be done. Not only the scaling, but also implementation and monitoring and evaluation of the results can be done at the same time to make sure that the scaling in the next 10 years will work effectively, efficiently. Yeah, just a few photos to share with you. This is one of the site visits we organized to bring farmers from different provinces to one of our CSVs to show the model to them. This champion farmer was interviewed several times on TV. He even came down to Hanoi to receive the prize. And we also went to different national workshops to share our work. And actually, it was this event here was very much appreciated by the ministry level people here. They say that this is a very good approach that can potentially work very well within the NTM program. It happened back in 2018, 2 years ago, and I got a chance to speak about this on TV for half an hour about the CSV work and its potential in a NTM program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vin, for presenting to us the CSV approach and the framework for scaling up adaptation options in agriculture through participatory approach. Vin also walked us through the various steps in the development of CSVs, starting with identifying rural areas that need climate interventions, conducting situational analyses, and then the development of suitable and appropriate CSA technologies and practices. And then from this portfolio of CSA technologies and practices, prioritize which ones are for implementation through training. Okay, Vin also differentiated horizontal from vertical scaling, the two scaling pathways for CSV adoption in the National Target Program on New Rural Development of Vietnam. Thank you so much, Vin. And I think our next speaker is here already. Our next speaker this morning is the head of the regional project on climate smart land use in Asean, funded by the German government and implemented by GIZ. The project is based in the Asean Secretariat in Jakarta. Ms. Reuter is a climate policy expert, and her previous positions mostly focused on supporting policies and actions related to nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, and climate transparency. With that, I now turn over the screen to Hanna. Hanna?
Thank you very much, Kim, for the introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. I want to talk to you about two topics, basically. I would firstly like to give you a brief overview about ASEAN policymaking related to climate change in the field of agriculture and forestry, which is also of relevance for smallholder farmers. And I would also like to give a brief introduction about how the CSLU project is supporting ASEAN in this regard. So let me start with the ASEAN policy framework. Climate change is reflected in a number of ASEAN policy documents in the food, agriculture, and forestry sectors, or short, the FAF sectors. The most important document here is the Vision and Strategic Plan for ASEAN Cooperation in Food, Agriculture, and Forestry. Of course, this document is not all about climate change, as you can already see in the vision that I included in this slide, but climate change is mentioned repeatedly throughout the document and is most prominently addressed in Strategic Thrust 4, which talks about increasing resilience to climate change, natural disasters, and other shocks. So this strategic plan also includes 8 action programs, which address activities ASEAN aims to promote in the realm of climate change, for example, promoting research and development, capacity building, or technology transfer. The strategic plan is implemented through different ASEAN working groups, such as the ASEAN Working Group on Crops, or Agriculture Research and Development, or Social Forestry, and so forth. All of these working groups have strategic plans of actions where they operationalize the strategic plan with its strategic thrusts in the context of their specific work area. I would like to briefly introduce another policy framework in the context of ASEAN, namely the ASEAN Multi-Sectoral Framework on Climate Change, Agriculture and Forestry towards Food Security, or short, the AFCC. This is a very special policy framework because it's cross-sectoral in nature, linking the 3 ASEAN community pillars. So the ASEAN Economic Community, the Political Security Community, and the Social Cultural Community. Its goal is to contribute to food security through sustainable, efficient, and effective use of land, forest, water, and aquatic resources by minimizing the risk and impacts of climate change. So this is in its essence, an organized platforms for supporting dialogue and cooperation among different ASEAN working groups coming from different work areas. And it repeatedly also addresses local livelihoods, farmers, and vulnerable groups. So these 2 policy frameworks I just talked about are more general, high-level policy frameworks that don't go very much into detail of different topics. For this, ASEAN working groups in the FAF sectors have published a number of other policy tools that are a little bit more specified and more technical, and often provide more guidance about how to actually implement certain topics, certain priorities in the ASEAN member states, for example, guidelines or recommendation papers. Examples for these are the ASEAN regional guidelines for promoting climate smart agricultural practices, or the guidelines for promoting responsible investments in food, agriculture, and forestry, or the guidelines for agroforestry development. So in the picture that you see on this slide, the CSLU project tried to illustrate how the national level implementation of climate smart practices is linked to the ASEAN policy frameworks. And well, the key message here is actually that ideally, regional, national, and local implementation is, of course, interlinked through a mutual flow of information. So, on the one hand, ASEAN guidelines summarize and disseminate information which can inform activities in ASEAN member states. For example, priorities coming from the ASEAN level could be reflected in policies, strategies, and national programs, or approaches promoted by guidelines could be disseminated through national trainings or other exchange formats to local stakeholders, or the still rather general ASEAN guidelines could be adapted and translated, tailored to the national needs into more, well, locally adapted guidelines. And all these activities would then again, of course, benefit local implementation. But on the other hand, ASEAN guidelines don't come out of the blue. They are informed by what's happening on the ground. They're informed by experience made during national and local implementation of climate smart practices. And they then highlight tested concepts and approaches that already have been applied successfully by ASEAN member states. They showcase good practices and aggregate lessons learned from local implementation and make them available across all ASEAN member states. So at least that is the ideal scenario. Of course, in our project, we also observe challenges related to that. And well, three main challenges that are not necessarily specific to the food, agriculture, and forestry sector is that, at least challenges related to implementation, is that ASEAN policies are often not binding. So it's up to the member states whether to take them up or not and how. Strategies and action plans partly lack clear implementation mechanisms and also clear allocation of resources or clearly defined responsibilities. And also on the ASEAN level, there's no very systematic monitoring and evaluation of progress and impacts. Nevertheless, of course, ASEAN has proved many times that that its policies can be beneficial for implementation on the ground. I already spoke about how ASEAN policies and guidelines can inform national and local planning and policies, but ASEAN also provides platforms for dialogue between countries and with other stakeholders, and of course, ASEAN bodies can facilitate access to expertise and funding. In this context, I would like to highlight to you the work of the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network, the ASEAN CIN, as a platform for exchange and cooperation. And this is an informal network that is very much linked to the work of the ASEAN Working Group for Agriculture Research and Development. It basically acts as a think tank to this working group, and it consists of ASEAN representatives, mostly from agricultural ministries or national research institutions. And its goal is to ensure that ASEAN member states are in a better position to adapt their land use sectors to climate change and optimize the mitigation potential. And it does it through promoting exchange of information, expertise, and experiences on CSA and linking policymakers to scientific institutions, international organizations, other actors. During the meetings of the ASEAN CIN, we often also have a representation of civil society actors who provide inputs from their work on the ground with local communities and smallholder farmers. And the ASEAN CIN has also repeatedly contributed to developing the ASEAN guidelines I just talked about. And that brings me to what our project is actually doing, because supporting the ASEAN CIN is an important part of the CSLU project. Some facts and figures about CSLU. So our counterpart is the ASEAN Secretariat. We are also based in the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta, and funding is coming from the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. The project runs for 2 years, but it's not a standalone project. It actually builds on the successes of other projects, for example, the Forestry and Climate Change Project 4CC that some of you might know. The objective of the project is to strengthen ASEAN's coordination role in developing policies for climate change mitigation in land use. And we operate on 3 levels, so to say. Firstly, we try to improve cooperation between AMS on a regional level for promoting initiatives for adaptation and mitigation in agriculture and forestry. Secondly, we aim to improve cooperation between ASEAN member states in international climate policy processes. And thirdly, we also operate on the cross-sectoral level, where we try to enhance synergies among ASEAN sectoral working groups. Here you can see just a few activities that we are implementing. As I said, we support the ASEAN CIN, for example, through organizing meetings, technical events, webinars, and so forth. We also support the ASEAN Negotiating Group on Agriculture, which communicates ASEAN positions on agriculture in the UNFCCC and was actually established through ASEAN CIN. Then we are very excited to, beginning of October, launch the ASEAN Climate Leadership Program, which we are jointly implementing with our friends from Circa. And then we are working on a number of knowledge products, for example, case studies on climate change mitigation and adaptation approaches in food, agriculture, and forestry in ASEAN. And something that we are planning to publish in a few weeks, actually, and that refers to some of the issues I just spoke about earlier in the presentation, is a review of ASEAN guidance for climate smart land use practices, where we commissioned the Stockholm Environment Institute to compare different ASEAN guidelines and also assess how they are being utilized and perceived by key stakeholders in ASEAN in order to come up with recommendations how to improve development of guidelines and their dissemination and implementation in the future. So this is going to be published in 2 or 3 weeks, I hope. And lastly, we also implement activities in some selected ASEAN member states for demonstrating how ASEAN guidelines could be reflected in national and local implementation. If you want to learn more about what the project is doing, please click on the link given on the slide or simply contact me. And that's all I wanted to share. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Hanna, for giving us a brief introduction on the ASEAN policy frameworks. These high-level policy frameworks that contribute to food security, increase resilience to climate change, and you also share with us the challenges and opportunities on the implementation of these ASEAN guidelines. Hanna also introduced to us the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network as a platform for exchange and cooperation. And also Hanna mentioned about the CSLU, or the Climate Smart Land Use Project, and how it supports ASEAN bodies and ASEAN member states. And one of which is through the conduct of the ASEAN Climate Leadership Program. So GIZ and Circa is collaborating on this online climate leadership program in the ASEAN, and it will kick off on October 6th. So we all look forward to that. Thank you very much, Hanna. Our next speaker, we'll get back to you, Hanna, during the Q&A, in the Q&A portion. So our next speaker, Dr. Delia Catacutan, was trained in natural resources management. She has over 20 years research experience on the institutional, technical, and policy dimensions of agroforestry and integrated natural resources management in Asia and Africa. She is a senior scientist and regional coordinator of the Southeast Asia Regional Program of the World Agroforestry, or ICRAF. Dr. Catacutan led numerous scientific positions in ICRAF and has authored more than 100 scientific articles, book chapters, policy briefs, manuals, and guidelines. She also led the preparation of the ASEAN guidelines on agroforestry development, and in 2018 received the highest commemorative medal for her contribution to the cause of agriculture and rural development in Vietnam. Dr. Catacutan has a PhD in natural and resources and rural systems management from the University of Queensland, Australia, and a postdoc on sustainability science at Harvard University. The screen is yours, Dr. Delia.
So thank you very much for having me in this seminar. It's so great to be here and to see some friends and colleagues in the Philippines. So I won't take much time with introduction. Thank you very much for that generous introduction. So the topic that was given to me is quite specific, but I think it links very nicely to what the previous speakers were talking about. So Hanna was talking about regional frameworks, policy frameworks, and how CSLU is supporting those ASEAN frameworks, and Ving was presenting a national level initiative. So I will come down now to the field. So, and we will be talking about agroforestry contributions to climate resilient landscapes and their impacts on smallholders. So my presentation outline or structure would be the following. First, I will briefly discuss about agroforestry, what it means and what are the challenges around agroforestry. I will follow it up with some of the links or impacts of agroforestry at landscape level, and then to the local level at household or smallholder level. So first, I know that everyone knows about agroforestry, but there are also different perspectives and understanding about agroforestry that's really floating around. And to some extent, we could not come up with a single common definition of what agroforestry, because it means many things to, and probably differently to different people. So, but however, universally, we know that agroforestry is a sustainable land use that combines agriculture and forestry systems. That is actually quite complicated when you talk about agriculture and forestry. But the simple definition that we have adopted for agroforestry is it's the integration of trees and woody perennials in agricultural production systems to balance various needs, such as the following: trees for timber, fruits, and other commercial purposes, diverse and adequate supply of nutritious foods, both to meet global demand and to satisfy the economic needs of producers, and also the protection of the natural environment so that it continues to provide resources and environmental services to meet the needs of the present generations and those that come. So agroforestry is well understood as a practice, as a farming system, but it is less so as a land use system. As you can see on the diagram on the right side, you have agriculture plus forestry. That's a graphic representation of the relationship and the strong linkages between the two systems, which is still quite difficult to get by, and especially with these institutional silos between agriculture and forestry. Agroforestry is not explicitly a land use category in both agriculture and forestry maps, as you may have observed in the different countries. It remains a practice in social forestry or under production forest, but in agriculture, it could be part of horticulture or perennials. Regardless, agroforestry is simply combining agriculture and forestry systems to achieve multiple purpose. So the next slide shows where is the place for agroforestry in this global forest transition curve, and it will help us understand why agroforestry is needed. So this global forest transitions curve, we start with old growth forest or natural forest, if you wish to call it, wherein there's expected high carbon stocks in that forest. And then people begin to log the forest, cut the forest, and we found ourselves in logged over forest. And then it continues to degrade. So you come down to a phase of degradation, a forest degradation, where what's left is just secondary forest and some patches of agroforest. Then degradation goes on down to the negative trend, which is now the state of deforestation. And globally, farming has been recognized to be responsible for almost 30% of GHG emissions. And agriculture is regarded to be the cause of 80% of tropical deforestation. So here, of course, this transition curve follows with population growth. If you overlay population, of course, you will see that global population has increased tremendously over time, and it coincides with this forest transition curve. So here in the middle part is really the state of deforestation, degradation and deforestation, where you have monoculture crops, commercial and both smallholder cropping systems. But slowly, and even in the last 20 or so 30 years ago, we've seen some positive trends. So many countries in the world is already starting to move towards the positive trend, which is through reforestation and agroforestry. So this is where landscapes has become more integrated. You will see more landscape mosaics with agroforestry, plantations, crop fields, and woodlots. And this is, as I said, and as I was going to say earlier, that this is where agroforestry sits nicely in this positive curve. So agroforestry as an agricultural method mimics natural ecosystems. It cannot go back to where it was. It cannot help bring that, but it could somehow help reverse these trends from a negative trend to a positive trend. Yeah. So basically what we want to see really is trees coming back in agricultural landscapes. And here I am making reference specifically to Northwest Vietnam, which actually ties very nicely with what Vinh has presented earlier. So this is an example of an agroforestry exemplar landscape, which has been supported, facilitated by ICRAF with support from the from Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. So this is a 50-hectare exemplar landscape in Son La province, northwest of Vietnam. So as you can see, this is really what we want to come back to. So this is an image of a positive trend in this forest landscape transition curve. And you probably would ask, is this possible? You know, can we achieve this? For how long? So actually, the problem is just in the agricultural sector, nobody is just counting the trees that exist on those lands. This is why we cannot tell that actually agroforestry or trees on farms are increasing. In 2016, there was a global publication that brings a lot of good news about trees in agricultural lands. That publication by Zomer, an ICRAF scientist, and others actually reported that over 43% of agricultural lands has 10% and more tree cover. The highest tree cover on agricultural lands was 45%, and they were found in tropical regions, particularly in Central Asia. So with that, carbon storage on agricultural land was estimated to be 45 billion tons of carbon, with trees contributing over 75% to this global trend. Indeed, globally, more than 1/3 of agricultural land has greater than 75 tons of carbon per hectare, this is actually 9 times higher of total carbon stocks on agricultural lands compared to the report and the estimates of IPCC. So the good news is that agricultural land is gaining more carbon and hence sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And the question is thus whether this progress can be accelerated through agroforestry. So here now on the slide that you are seeing, this is how carbon sequestration and carbon storage on agricultural lands can be improved. And that is through just agroforestry. As you can see here, the single tree can do a lot, can provide so much benefits. And I don't need to mention all of this. Many of us know what this single tree even can bring to the landscape or can contribute to the landscape. So the next slide here shows that, in summary, shows that trees on farm can control runoff and soil erosion, and hence prevent landslides, sedimentation, and riverbeds, and controls flooding. due to the other, the graph on the left side shows a study in Indonesia, in Indonesian Agroforestry, wherein agroforestry trees, the tree integration on farms provide anchoring and binding soil services through the tree rooting pattern. So agroforestry also, or trees on farm, can augment soil water availability in land use systems. It improves microclimate conditions. It can reclaim eroded, degraded lands and polluted soils. It can reduce insect pests and associated diseases and secure food via increases in yields and livelihood resilience. So I will now come down to an example of an agroforestry system that ICRAF has been working on in Northwest Vietnam. So in Northwest Vietnam, where Vinh was also working, ICRAF has conducted an evaluation of 10 to 15 agroforestry systems. So I'm just giving you one example here amongst the 15 agroforestry systems that ICRAF has been evaluating on. So this is an agroforestry system with thick coffee, plum, forage grass, legumes, rotated with corn. As you can see on the left side, in year 1, you can see this field on the left side without the contour lines that have very poor, slow growing maize. They look like grasses, but they're actually maize. And on the right side actually is the contoured field at year 1 when ICRAF started its work. Now after year 3, this is how the landscape or the field looks like. So if you compare the two, you will see here on the one side, the field without contour grass strips, you will see that there are signs of soil erosion coming down from the top of the slope downwards. But here on the other side, erosion has been very much controlled because of the presence of the grass strips. So next slide, please. So I will discuss, okay, so these are the components of the system. Basically in year 1, I think in the 6 to 8 months of the establishment of the system, farmers already had started to cut and harvest the trees. And then also the cash crops, which are beans, peanuts. And then in year 3, coffee, this is Arabica coffee. On the 3rd year, coffee was harvested, the first year of harvest for coffee. And of course, takes a long time, and plum will probably its first harvest will be on the 4th or the 5th year. So so here now I'm showing the different benefits of coming from the different components of this system. So here we have coffee yield in agroforestry system. So we're looking at 3 different coffee-based agroforestry system, wherein the first is thick plum coffee, soybeans, forage. So the one I showed you earlier. The yield for coffee was 2.2 tons in year 3, which contributed 13.2 million Vietnamese dong. That would be around $700 to $800 in year 3. Then in term for acacia, longan, coffee, soybeans, and forage grass system, it was higher. It was much higher, 4.7 tons in year 3. And for macadamia, coffee, and soybeans, it's 4.2 to 4.3 tons in year 3 and year 4. And mind you, the average coffee yield for monocultures in this area is about 3 to 4 tons. You will be lucky if you will have more than 4 tons of Arabica coffee in this area. Okay, so next slide, please. Here we are looking at grass yield in the system. So for grass yield in year 1, the yield was about 50 to 100 kilograms of grasses per hectare, and that contributed to from 1 to 3 million Vietnamese dong, and that's like something like $150 to $200. If a family has one cow that needs 30 kilograms of grass per day to gain 0.6 kilograms of weight, then the grasses there that you produce from your agroforestry farm would be more than sufficient to feed one cow. So because in 1 year, a cow needs 11 tons of forage grasses or 75 kilograms to produce 1 kilogram of meat. Now, in that particular region also, there's a lot of farmers that are raising fish on small fish ponds. And they also use grasses to feed those fish. So if the farmers use the grasses to feed their fish, they would require 40 kilograms of grass to gain 1 kilogram weight of the fish. So in other words, the grass contribution into the system is very important. It's really contributing significantly to the whole system. And for nitrogen fixing species such as nuts and legumes, they provide, which can be harvested, 5, 6, or even 4 months. They provide earlier income while waiting for coffee to be harvested and also help improve soil fertility. Okay, now in terms of, before I forgot, we also have systems wherein maize is the main crop, intercropped with trees. And our findings suggest that all agroforestry systems with maize component outperforms maize monoculture production in terms of long-term benefit. Now we come down to soil erosion benefit. So there are four systems within which we measure soil erosion. And for Lungan maize forage grass system, soil erosion has been reduced by 50 to 56%. And thick plum, coffee, soybeans forage grass, that's 22 to 23%. For acacia, Lungan, coffee, and forage grass, that's 60 to 90%. And acacia, mango, maize forage grass system, that's 22 to 74%. Now, soil loss in Lungan maize forage grass system was only 20 tons per year compared to 37 and 34 tons for monoculture maize and Lungan. So it says really significant, more than 50% reduction in soil erosion. Now, so for 20 tons per year of soil conserved through agroforestry, that would be equivalent to $250 US in savings from the farmers if the farmer has to replenish soil nutrients with commercial NPK. So we use the replacement method to highlight the economic value of soil erosion control. Now, in agroforestry, also in agroforestry analysis, we also have used this concept of what we call land equivalent ratio, which is a concept in agriculture that describes the relative land area required under sole cropping to produce the same yield as undercropping. So a good land equivalent ratio is one that is higher than 1. In many studies, mixed annual crops were found to have a land equivalent ratio of 1.3. So obviously it's better than monocrop. In Indonesia, for example, an oil palm and cacao agroforestry system can have a land equivalent ratio of up to 1%. So simply put, agroforestry really outperforms maize monoculture systems. In most cases, it has higher LER, land equivalent ratio. The challenge, however, is that it has some kind of a sacrificial period during the first stage, early stage of establishment, because of the investment that is required to establish agroforest, particularly the tree component. Sometimes, especially if you are using species that are not available in the local area, wherein farmers have to secure or to procure those seedlings from far away places. So that will incur a higher cost on the farmers. And that means the establishment cost higher, and causing a lag time in the recovery period in agroforestry systems. So we need agroforestry policy support and enabling policy support for agroforestry to be successful and to be scaled up in wider scales, and to deliver those impacts to both to farmers and at the landscape scale. So enabling environment through policies and programs are highly needed. However, in many ASEAN member states, there is no dedicated policy or program for agroforestry, despite the recognition of its multiple benefits, both at landscape and at household levels. Some policies and strategies and programs could be used, however, as entry points for agroforestry development. And I have a short list of these programs, strategies, and policies here for some of the ASEAN member states. In Indonesia, for example, agroforestry has been identified as a strategy in achieving land degradation neutrality. In Vietnam, the CSA Climate Smart Agriculture Strategy, and also in the revised forestry law in 2018. In Laos, there is this PDR, Lao PDR GCF country program and strategies for facilitated by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, where it also mentions agroforestry as a viable approach. In Myanmar also, they have identified agroforestry as a means to achieve their NDCs. And especially quite recently, there has been a major decision of the Department of Agriculture to target agroforestry in their INDCs. And that would be the first time for the agriculture sector to target agroforestry under NDCs. Cambodia also, under their National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. In Thailand, the Thailand National Report on Natural Resources and Environment Policy and Planning also identified agroforestry as a viable option for improved natural resource management. And in the Philippines, you will see many documents, government documents, primarily in the forest management in the Philippines, and also in the first national report on the land degradation neutrality. At the regional level, Hanna mentioned this earlier, there is an ASEAN Guidelines on Agroforestry Development that provides a framework for ASEAN member states to initiate policies and programs that enable the scaling up and development of agroforestry in these countries. So in summary, my last, undoubtedly, trees on farms not only support the need for fodder, food, wood fuel, but also reduce the risk of deforestation, increased biodiversity, contribute to ecosystem services, and sequester carbon. Agroforestry that are supported with viable value chains and a good environment, policy environment, becomes a source of food and income for smallholders through a variety of products such as rice, fruit trees, etc. Regional and national agricultural policies may provide a bridge for agriculture and forestry that can encourage and guide smallholders to implement agroforestry. I think that's all, and thank you for having me in this seminar.
Thank you very much, Dr. Catacutan, for your presentation, which greatly improved our understanding on agroforestry's contributions to building resilient landscapes, their linkages to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the impacts on smallholder farmers, providing livelihood opportunities and enhancing their food security. Dr. Catacutan also shared with us the benefits of multi-story agroforestry systems enjoyed by smallholder farmers in Northwest Vietnam. Dr. Catacutan emphasized the need for enabling policies and strategies that would support agroforestry development and encourage and guide smallholders to implement agroforestry. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Catacutan. Again, may I remind our online attendees watching the webinar via Facebook Live, please start typing your questions in the comment section, including your location or country of origin. If you are tuned in via Zoom, please post your questions in the Q&A box, which you should find in the menu bar on your screen. With that, let me now introduce to you our fourth and last speaker this morning. He served as scientist, agronomist at the International Rice Research Institute and led implementation of on-farm adaptive research and in-country training on natural resource management, participatory varietal selection and seed systems in Ayeyarwady Delta, Myanmar. He was also acting ERI representative in Myanmar from 2014 to 2017. Prior to joining the International Rice Research Institute, Dr. Labios was a university researcher and affiliate faculty at the Agricultural Systems Institute, College of Agriculture and Food Science, University of the Philippines, Los Baños. In 2013, he was conferred the rank of Scientist 1 by the Civil Service Commission and the National Academy of Science and Technology, Department of Science and Technology. He has received numerous awards, foremost of which is the Ho Chi Minh Medal for having great contribution to the cause of Agriculture and Rural Development of Vietnam, given by the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development and the Vietnam Academy of Agricultural Sciences. Dr. Labios obtained his PhD and Masters of Science in Agronomy, major in crop production and physiology from the Iowa State University, USA. Over to you, Sir Romy.
Thank you very much, Kim, and for that generous introduction. Welcome to the 17th SOLVE webinar. Today's topic is about the CRA technologies and approaches and some options for smallholder farmers and farming families. So to start it with, what is climate resilient agriculture? For this presentation, CRA is defined as it integrates climate responsiveness in developing agricultural technologies and approaches in order to achieve food security and resilience under a changing climate. What are the three pillars of CRA? One is productivity, by increasing agriculture productivity and income in a sustainable, environmentally sound manner. Second is adaptation, by building the capacity of households and food systems to adapt to climate change. And thirdly is mitigation, by reducing greenhouse gas emission and increase carbon sequestration. Let us review first the different agroecosystems in the Philippines. There are 4 agroecosystems as defined by the Department of Agriculture and Department of Environmental Natural Resources. Start with the coastal, which has elevation of 0 to 10 meter above sea level. And the second one is the lowlands, and subdivided to irrigated lowland and rain-fed lowland, wherein these ecosystems are prone to submergence or flash flooding or drought. The third one is the upland and hilly land ecosystem with the elevation of about 100 to 500 meter above sea level. And finally, the highland, which is more than 500 meter above sea level, wherein shifting cultivation and permanent agriculture are common practices. For this presentation, we define CRA technology as a practice that is a result of application of scientific knowledge that is used to adapt to or mitigate a changing climate. The aim is to enhance productivity and sustainability of the stakeholders' income while minimizing damage to the environment. On the other hand, CRH approach refers to the ways and means of dealing with the changing climate using CRA technologies, including stakeholders' involvement. To start with these technologies, let's start with the lowland ecosystem. Notably, in this irrigated or rain-fed ecosystem, the availability of climate-ready rice varieties, or some called it stress-tolerant varieties, that has tolerance to drought, to salinity, to submergence or flash flooding, or even stagnant condition, and also tolerance to heat. This slide shows one of the experiments at Erie, wherein this different rice varieties was submerged to 17 days of full submergence. You could see that those varieties or regular varieties have less survival rate compared to varieties that have sub-1 gene. Sub-1 gene is the one responsible for the tolerance of the varieties for this condition. The other technology that's getting popular in the lowland is the use of laser-assisted land leveling. This is very helpful because of the benefits it provides, such as reducing about 25% of water use for irrigation, saving of fuel by about 20%, improving field trafficability, and providing uniform growth for the crops. And even the efficiency of nitrogen is higher to about 10 to 13%, and head rice recovery by 2%. For farmers practicing direct seeded rice, one innovations made is the use of 6 to 8 rows drum seeder, either manually pulled or by use of some small tractors. Other areas have this mechanical seeder for direct seeding. Direct seeded rice provides advantage wherein crop matures 7 to 10 days earlier than transplanted crop. Thus, planting succeeding crop may be adjusted. Also, the soil in dry DSR remains aerobic for most of the time in the season, which reduces methane emission. Some technologies for efficient water management includes the use of solar for groundwater pumping to minimize the cost of the use of oil. The other thing is in areas where water harvesting is possible, the use of small water impounding or small farm reservoir as shown in this slide. This is in Bulacan, wherein during the rainy season, the water are being collected and then used for dry season for supplying for supplemental irrigation of upland crops like corn or sweet corn or green corn for others, or peanut and other high-value crops. One smarter water management technology introduced by Erie is the so-called alternate wetting and drying system. The aided AWD reduces water usage by 30% without yield loss. And also, AWD reduces greenhouse gases emission. This slide shows the results from farmers' fields, wherein greenhouse gas emission was reduced by 65 to 77%. Another technology that can be used by many farmers is in terms of storing their grains after harvest. On the left side is the farmer's practice using ordinary sacks. But by using hermetic storage, which is an oxidant-tight containers and controls water damages as well as the control insect damages, and also reduces rodent and bird damages. This kind of grain storage is suited to the tropics. It can come to a 50-kilogram super bags, 1 to 3 tons grain safe, or even a cocoon-type grain storage. One problem after rice harvest is burning the straw. So there are now technologies that can be used to manage the rice straw. One is by straw baling for livestock feed. There's a big program by the Department of Agriculture, particularly the Philippine Carabao Center and Pillars, about straw baling for livestock feed. Another use of rice straw is mushroom production, as well as rice straw paper making and biochar production. Recently, there's a book I just saw in the publication about the sustainable rice straw management, authored by Engineer Martin Gomert and some of his co-authors. This is now available, and if you want to know more about rice straw management, then you could access to this book. The integrated system program by the Pillars is what we call Palayamanan. Palay means rice, and Yamans means wealth. Palayamanan helps farming families in diversifying their crops and starting other sources of income such as fish pond, poultry, livestock, as well as high-value crop production. Involving the farmers in technology development and utilization, one of the approaches is through the participatory varietal selection. In here, farmers, through preference analysis, are enabled to evaluate the physical and agronomic traits at various growth stages of the different rice varieties that can support the local technology recommendations. In addition, through sensory evaluation, farmers are enabled to evaluate the eating quality of the different rice varieties that can support the local technology recommendations. Putting together the results in terms of seed production or seed multiplication, if there is no formal seed system, one can follow this community-based seed system approach. Dr. Bin mentioned about the climate smart villages. This is one approach that can be applied in the uplands. And in the case of the Philippines, CSB is being implemented in Quezon, led by the 11RR and CCAPs. And CSB demonstrates a food secure community that can sustain the environment while at the same time mitigates the effects of climate change. CSB also serves as the center for knowledge transfer on CRA technologies and approaches among farmers. One approach in the highland is the popular community-based forest management in terms of managing the forest and other natural resources in the highlands. In the coastal areas, the restoration of coral reef and mangrove as buffer are some of the technologies being used. In terms of information technology management, the Sarai project of UPL, we have this WISE or Water Advisory for Irrigation Scheduling System, the SpeedTech or Smarter Pest Identification Technology, or the AWS, the use of automatic weather station, and the Sarai Enhanced Agricultural Monitoring System. In Erie, they have this rice crop manager, wherein the use of rice crop manager can increase the yield and net income of some farmers. And in this slides, you could see an increase of yield using this RCM compared to farmers' practices and the added benefits of using the RCM. Another one is the use of GIS map. This is an example in Myanmar on where and when to use the new technologies or the CRA technologies mentioned earlier. The one with the dotted line is in the southern tip of the Ayawardi Delta, which is prone to salinity. And putting together the maps of the cropping pattern, the stress area map, and the technologies that mentioned above, which are the best bet options for each domain, and involving the farmers in technology identification dissemination, this could lead to large-scale dissemination. Other suggested promotion and dissemination strategies for CRA technologies and approaches are the following: through regional cooperation, the development of IEC materials, resource mobilization, regional consolidation of CRA technologies and approaches, agricultural insurance, institutional sustainability, farmers' field and business schools as social learning platforms, technology and asset management, identifying regional and farm-level adaptation actions plans, and integration of land into climate change adaptive planning. This last slide are some of the suggested strategies to transform Philippine agriculture. And actually, this slide was prepared by Dr. Leo Sebastian, former the CCAP's regional coordinator of Asia, Southeast Asia. So to start with, one strategy is to enhance social inclusion. Then the other one is to improve access to finance. Then the other one is mainstream low emission development. The other one is go digital. The other strategy is to empower farmers and farming organization and educate the consumers and producers. All these things are needed to implement a suitable CRA technologies and approaches through integrated clusters and landscape approaches. So these are some of the references that you could read if you are interested to know more about the climate smart rice production. This is in English and in Myanmar dialect, co-published with Dr. Rainer Wassman. The other one is the publication by CIRCA and CCAPS on the Compendium of Climate Resilient Agriculture Technologies and Approaches. So if you like to get soft and hardbound copies of this book, you could contact CIRCA for a minimal fee. Thank you, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sir Romy, for presenting to us the different agricultural technologies and approaches that can enhance our smallholders' resilience to climate change in different agroecological systems. These technologies and approaches are designed for, according to Sir Romy, for sustained productivity, adaptation, and or mitigation to climate change. Sir Romy also discussed the involvement of farmers, the end users of these climate resilient technologies and approaches in climate and agriculture related discussions, improvement of their productivity in the farms, and enhancement of their adaptive capacity against current and impending risks related to changing climate. Okay, and also Sir Romy suggested ways to promote and disseminate these strategies on CRAs and technologies. Okay, thank you so much. So we now move on to the Q&A. Okay, so are we all ready, panelists and speakers? So our first question is directed to Dr. Vin. Dr. Vin, this is from Forester Celso Diaz of the Philippines. Dr. Vin, what is your level of success in enhancing the adaptive capacity of the rural communities in Vietnam to the impacts of climate change?
Yeah, that's a great question. Before going directly into the answer, I think the thing that we need to do to be able to measure the success is to apply the monitoring and evaluation protocol along the way with implementation. Yeah, so I was saying that we need M&E or monitoring and evaluation tool or tools to be able to measure the success of the work. So to me, the level of success is first we need to raise the awareness and measure the awareness of farmers in their communities to make sure that they are aware of climate risk and their impacts. And so once they are aware of this, then we work with them in introducing different measures, like technical measures, like CSA TNPs, work with them and verify the results. Like what we have to make sure that they understand the technical process. They need to also monitor and evaluate the success of these specific technical practices or CSA tech practices. So they learn, they understand the effects of the practices, and so they become automatically, apply and multiply and diffuse the knowledge to other farmers. So that's one thing relating to technical measures, like one of the 4 components or 6 components of a CSV. The next thing is, okay, once the technical measures are successfully tested and successfully adopted by farmers, then we need to sustain the CSV model, because CSA TNPs they are only one of the components of the CSV, right? So another level of success is to be able to bring in all the players within this specific or small geographical boundary. They need to be also involved in helping to sustain the model. For example, when farmers are already important players, policymakers, or like, let's say, local authorities, they need to work closely with them to continuously support them with current policies and investment. Private sector, so the private sector, or say industries or enterprises, they guarantee the output, or like, let's say, the market for CSA products, because without a secure market, CSA TNPs have no chance to be implemented in long term. So we need the involvement of the private sector here. They can provide like subsidies. For example, in Indian Bai, this cassava factory in one district has been subsidizing and providing support, like input support, for example, fertilizer and pesticides to cassava farmers for 17 years to make sure that the market of the product, of the commodity, cassava commodity, is can be sustained. So that's one thing. And also within the community, within and CSV, people need to develop a so-called how do you say it, like regulations, like CSV regulations that guide people through different steps, different activities that can make sure that the model can be sustainable in the long run. So there are different things that we need to measure to conclude a CSV success, and this all together fall into an M&E protocol. So we need to plan this M&E work right from the beginning, take into account all of these indicators to measure success. So that's my answer. That's a great question, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vinh. Yes, Forester Diaz, Dr. Vinh said that the measure of success depends on the level of awareness of the farmers on the impacts of climate change, and then also on the level of support of the local government unit and the involvement of the private sector through the provision of subsidies and inputs, the adoption of these CSA technologies and practices. And also, Dr. Vinh said that people need to develop regulations or guidelines for sustainability. I hope that answers your question, Forester Diaz. This next question is I think this one is directed to Dr. Romy Labios from Setia Sari Girsang. Okay, so Sir Romy, what is the relationship between, what is the relationship of water saving, such as the alternate wetting and drying method, to herbicide applications? She said low water availability during planting can increase weed that it can affect. the environment. What can you say about that, Sir Romy?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, that's one of the objectives of using AWD, not only on reducing the water usage, but also in terms of maintenance of the other problems like the weeds. As you can schedule the water irrigation, you could also schedule some of your weed management. And thereby putting together all this kind of management, you could reduce some of the problems like the weeds.
Thank you, Sir Romy. For Miss Hanna. Hanna, the question again is from Forester Celso Diaz. In ASEAN countries, particularly in the Philippines, continuous declining of forest cover due to deforestation is still a big problem. What is your proposal to solve this problem to arrive at your climate smart land use?
Yes, thank you for that definitely crucial question. I wish there would be a straightforward answer to that. We would have many problems less. Actually, some project like, well, not mine maybe, because we are not specifically actually working on that problem. Many project would be obsolete if there would be a straightforward answer to that. Actually, I believe that Delia partly answered that question through her input on agroforestry. So maybe just as a very general answer from my side, but unfortunately, yeah, very general. There are many management approaches and technologies out there, such as agroforestry, different agroforestry practices, or forest landscape restoration, different other climate smart agriculture practices that address this problem. So the technology and the knowledge is out there. I think one of the key challenge lies with the enabling policy environment, also challenge that Delia mentioned in her input, and many things associated with that. And so lack of awareness with the stakeholders who actually would need to apply such practices, lack of understanding about economic benefits and also economic incentives to shift from certain practices. And the key challenge actually one of the key challenges for deforestation actually is that the problem doesn't lie in the forestry sector. So policies in the forestry sector are not sufficient, or changing policies in the forestry sector is not sufficient for addressing the problems. Actually, what we need are much more holistic, much more cross-sectoral policies and incentive programs and capacity building programs who address the problem of deforestation from different perspectives, really addressing the root causes of the issue. And this is unfortunately still very complex. That is something that it's against the nature of many institutional setups in many countries, and I can only speak from the perspective of ASEAN. This is an inherent problem in the bureaucracy of ASEAN. And I briefly mentioned the multi-sectoral framework, the AFCC, which is partly trying to address, or not partly, which is trying to address this problem that we need more holistic, more complex, more cross-cutting policies. But yeah, you immediately run into the problem that it challenges the mandates, the existing mandates, that it challenges, or that it raises questions about who's actually responsible for what, where are resources coming from, and so forth. So unfortunately, yeah, this is really not easy to answer. So, but I believe also maybe Delia also wants to chip in here, because she can, I guess, report from some very concrete progress on the ground, as she also mentioned the efforts in some ASEAN member states for promoting agroforestry, and this very much, I guess, very much shows, what the challenges are, but also how to overcome them, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Hanna. Yes, Dr. Delia, yes.
No, thanks, Hannah. I can only add a little thing. And first of all, it's actually to address the drivers of deforestation. You mentioned the causes, no? So what really drives deforestation? And if you can address that, that will be, we might have solved half of the problem. Now, that's why, you know, agriculture, as in my presentation, was recognized or has been recognized as a driver for deforestation due to the need to produce more food for a growing population. So this is why we are promoting agroforestry as part of the solution to addressing agriculture as a driver to deforestation, because you would have bring out the trees from those forests. You know, instead of going into the forest, you bring the trees into your farm so that you can benefit from those trees. A simple answer, but of course it's not that easy to implement, because it requires another aspect. Very important thing to consider is political will. It's really about the will to do it. Yeah, the will to address those drivers. And there are what we call, there are levers for change, and it's just so difficult to push that button because it involves a lot of history about agriculture, about development. You know, you go back to the time of industrialization, you know, monocultures and segregation of the landscape. You know, major driver for that was the idea that forestry is here, agriculture is here, and agriculture and the world has to feed a growing population, and there's no way to do that but to cut the forest. But now we have a solution to that, no? So you can produce what you need in one unit area, you know, and but not one farmer can address it. It has to be everybody. So that's why Hannah's point about intersectoral, multi-sectoral collaboration is very much needed. Thank you. I think that's all I can say.
Okay, Dr. Delia, here's a question for you while you're still on the screen. If agroforestry, from Forester Celso Diaz, if agroforestry is inside a production forest, do you have a model that would indicate the ideal size of agroforestry vis-a-vis purely forestry production?
Thank you, Forester Celso. Actually, ICRAF Philippines is currently, together with DENR, the FMB, Forest Management Bureau, is developing a number of agroforestry models for upland areas and grasslands, you know, I mean, forest areas as a whole. So there are, I think, about 24 models that ICRAF is developing. This is under a project funded by ADB through DNR. So I would say it's really difficult to say that there is an ideal size, you know, because I mean, for purposes of analysis, we always use 1 hectare as our unit of analysis. But actually, if you go to the forest inside, you know, lands may be too smaller than 1 hectare. So it really depends on the availability of land. What is really important to consider is the return to investments, returns to labor. So if you have a small piece of land and this is your input and this is what you get, that's the most important thing. So if you have 50, you know, like a half hectare agroforestry farm, and this is your cost, and this is what you get out of your investment, that is the most important thing, really. But of course, there's a value to size, right? It's also important to look at size, because if you consider markets, then you have to have this economy of scale. You have to have many, you know, large area to be economically viable. So in other words, I would say it depends on the purpose, you know, of the farmer or of the program of the government. If, for example, within the production forest, the purpose is to address food security, then you know, through subsistence agroforestry system, then a smaller area would be enough. But if you aim for large for what this is for marketing your agroforestry products, then you would have to increase your area, right? So in other words, it's really just about returns of investments. A few examples, however, for example, for our teak, plum, coffee, soybeans, forage grass, the returns of investment vary from year 1 to 5. At the beginning of the year, you would have almost a negative return to investment because of the investment cost. But then overall, on the third to the fourth, from the third to the fifth year, you will see an increasing trend in return to investment, as opposed to a monoculture system. In the monoculture maize system, the returns of investment in year 1 was 56%. Then it goes down up to 25% on the 5th year. So you would not want to have your system like that. You want to have an increasing trend, right, in your returns of investment. So really, by agroforestry, you will expect a higher returns and increasing returns of investments over time. But again, it depends on what you put in. So I would say it depends on the purpose, it depends on the available land, and it depends on the inputs you put into it. And your target, your purpose, whether it's for commercial or only for subsistence. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Delia, here's a follow-up question from Eileen Tamayo. I am a science teacher in an agricultural school. Can you give me clear means of implementing agroforestry at the school level? Our school has wide land area and a portion of an upland area from another city. Can we do tree planting activities in our school and these other land areas? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, yes, of course, ma'am. You can develop an agroforestry system in your, well, there are technical guidelines for developing, setting up, establishing an agroforestry farm or, an agroforestry field. And that's available online. And we will try to reach you out. If you leave your, if you leave your
email
address or email with us, I can try to send those materials with you. It's going to be a long explanation here. So, but yes, the answer is yes, it's really possible. The how is, it can follow. I can send you a technical guide.
Thank you, Ma'am Delia. Oh, so there you are, Miss Eileen Tamayo. Please email Circa and we'll connect you with Dr. Catacutan, Ma'am Delia. Okay, so our next question is for Dr. Bin. Dr. Vin from Bondid Peñaflor. Thank you, Dr. Vin, for the very informative presentation. Could you please tell me where I could access the details of the CSA, Technologies and Practices portfolios? Many thanks in advance. Yes, Dr. Vin?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Kim. Actually, I answered the question already that but I can repeat it for everybody's interest or information. The portfolios, CSA TNP portfolios for our research came from the actual work on the ground, and depending on the very specific biophysical and socio-economic conditions of the study site. So a portfolio of CSA TNPs can be developed based on site-specific characteristics. So there's no portfolio that fits all sites. So you need to do your homework, like identifying all the characteristics of the site you are working in, and then build up the portfolio for itself. And a portfolio of CSA TNPs can be derived from success stories that have been validated, and that can be potentially adopted in the site you are working in. And also part of it also comes from farmers' preferences, farmers that who they live there, who live there in that site. So there's no protocol that fits all sites. So thank you.
Okay, follow-up question, Dr. Vin. Does the CSV project, does it have a tool in conducting situational analysis and needs assessment? Is it possible to share this tool?
I was not involved in this SANA work because I only joined in the CCAPS program mid 2015, and the SANA work had been done before that, like half a year before that. But as far as I know, we didn't apply a concrete tool, so there was no tool back at the time to do the SANA work. So a SANA work actually consists of different sets of works, for example, like socioeconomic questionnaires and baseline surveys for biophysical characteristics, and then quantitative and qualitative data sets were then gathered and analyzed to make a report, the SANA report. So we didn't apply any tool, and I didn't apply any tool like this personally. So when I joined the program, the baseline report was already there. And so far, I don't know if there's such a tool. But in short, to do the SANA work, you need an interdisciplinary team to do it, because there's too many aspects to do.
Yep, thank you, Dr. Vin. Next question is for Dr. Labios, again from Forester Celso Diaz. If CRA technologies are not accessible to common farmers, what would be the impact on the output production using the traditional system?
Well, thank you for the question. Actually, it was already presented by an example presented by Dr. Delia, wherein if you have this kind of traditional system, and if you will not apply this improved, let's say, agroforestry system, there's a lot of issues like soil erosion, soil productivity decline, etc. But by implementing such a simple system, will improve the productivity of the land, also improve the environment, as well as improve the economic condition of the farmers. That also applied in the different ecosystem for a lowland farmer, upland farmers, and even the highland farmers. So in other words, traditional systems is good, but it will be better if a farmer or smallholders can apply the improved system that we have mentioned in this presentation.
Thank you, Sir Romy. And for our last question, I think this one can be answered by anyone from the group. How should we manage effectively on reducing agriculture lands due to urbanization? This is from Ms. Si Thu Min. Okay,
I can start.
Yes.
One of the programs now by the Department of Agriculture in the Philippines is land consolidation and this kind of consolidating the land of the farmers in order that they could produce better, and then they could demand higher price if they have large scale production. That's one way in order to help the farmers, the small farmers with the small land holdings.
Actually, my research area does not have to deal with urbanization at all, because we've been so far working mainly in the mountainous region, and we haven't experienced much with this issue. So this happens more in the Delta area. So,
Thank you, Dr. Vin. How about Hanna?
Well, I can only echo that we are also not really working on the topic of urbanization, but just maybe as a general response that, of course, urbanization is only one of the many causes for loss of productive agricultural land. Degradation is another big topic. I guess all of the approaches we heard about today are part of the answer, but only part of it. But yeah. but I can't say anything specific about pressures from urbanization on agricultural land. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. We have a few more questions lined up, but I am also mindful of the time that we have for this webinar. So rest assured that those questions that have not been addressed, we will be sending them to our speakers, and hopefully they will be able to address them as soon as possible. But before we close this webinar, may I request our speakers for some closing or takeaway message. Dr. Del Catacutan has to leave for another important meeting. So we start with Ms. Hanna. Some closing or takeaway message, please.
Thank you very much, Kim. Actually, I wasn't prepared for that. So, yes, I guess my takeaway message is I was also listening closely to the very interesting inputs by my colleagues here today. Well, my input was more, and also what my project is doing is more coming from the policy sphere, right? But policy always has to be informed by evidence from the ground, by research. So I guess something that I always realize when I'm in settings like this is how important it is to invest in dialogue between researchers, between practitioners who actually have to implement practices on the ground and bring them together with policymakers in order to improve the enabling policy environment and step by step bring different perspectives together for addressing the challenges that we are facing today. So dialogue between different spheres is very important. So thank you very much for offering a platform for this.
Thank you, Hanna. Dr. Vin?
Yes, I would like to follow up with Hanna's message because my message is more or less the same, but I will start with the case of our project first. We started in 2015 at a very CSV level. So at the time it was our main goal was to only test CSAT&Ps in a CSV and try to set up a CSV that would run on its own later. But then presentation. We have somehow managed to get to the top, get to the level, national level. There were times that I asked myself, like, what were we doing this for? Only testing CSAT&Ps in a single CSV, and for what if the work cannot be scaled? And fortunately, the opportunity came in 2017 when the Ministry of Agriculture sent someone to see me and to ask about the CSV experience, because they were looking for something like this in their new second 10-year strategy, and I said, okay, this is definitely the opportunity. And then over the past 3 years, we upgraded the project to a new level, like a very high level that we had never thought of. And we managed to approach the ministry level people, and we met with some very important people there to show, and we managed to show our experience and CSV approach, and they really appreciated that. They wanted to have the CSV approach in their NTM program, and now I'm going to publish like 3 review papers recommending policies. And hopefully these papers will reach, top people at the ministry, and somehow they can contribute to change the policy in the next 10 years. So my message is that we shouldn't give up hope, even how small the work we are doing now. And if you can find opportunities, then we can make our work more significant, even out of our expectations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vin. Sir Romy?
Okay. Thank you for inviting me today. And I hope everyone who is tuned in was able to learn something about some climate resilient technologies and approaches. The effects of climate change are already here upon us, and we should understand that the most affected are our smallholders, the youth, the adults, and the elderly. Their ways of life and their livelihood Implementing climate resilient practices will help climate-proof our smallholders and enable them to adapt and manage the detrimental effects of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your takeaway messages. So once again, with CIRCA led by our director, Dr. Glenn Gregorio, we would like to thank you. We would like to express our sincere gratitude to Hanna, Vin, Dr. Catacutan, and Dr. Romy for taking the time to join us today. It has been a pleasure to have you this morning. So how do we increase the resilience of our smallholder farmers to climate change? Our speakers this morning have presented to us a menu of tools, approaches, technologies, methodologies, and science or evidence-based solutions that would enable smallholder farmers to cope with the impacts of a changing climate, coupled with policies that need to be implemented on the ground with the support of the local government units and other relevant stakeholders. Although there is no one-size-fits-all tool, strategy, or approach, what is important is that our smallholder farmers are given these science and evidence-based solutions and technologies to deal with the challenges of climate change. That ends our webinar this morning, but before we close, please let us know what you think about this webinar by following the link to a quick feedback form shown on your screen. The same link will direct you to the request form for the e-certificate. Your feedback will help us improve our online learning events and make each one better and better. Please note that we will only accommodate requests for e-certificates within 24 hours after the end of this webinar. Kindly wait for your e-certificate to be issued within 10 working days. Please join us again for our next online conversation on Thursday, 7 October 2020, and this one is entitled, this one is titled the unrealized potential of biotechnology. Okay, so this will be hosted by Mr. Jerome Baradas of our Research and Thought Leadership Department. Okay, so please don't miss it. October 7, Thursday, the unrealized potential of biotechnology. Let us help one another get through this COVID-19 and win the fight against climate change. We hope that as we go along, we will be able to create a community of bigger, better, smarter, and climate resilient farmers and farming communities. This is Kim Bantayan for CIRCA. Have a good day, stay healthy, stay safe, and goodbye everyone. And thank you again to all our speakers. Bye.